The other day, I was idly thinking about grifters who focus on one side of the political spectrum or the other. Trump really boosted the market for right-wing grifters, like the guys who crowdfunded the wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. If you'll recall, former Trump aide Steve Bannon helped to run that particular grift, collecting more than $25 million from credulous conservatives contributing to the GoFundMe, building about 3 miles of wall in the end. It was just a 3-mile-long fence, and then they just fucked off with the rest of the money instead of, spending another $11 billion to make the rest of the wall. There are dozens of high-profile stories like that on the right, but the left also has its grifters. Like, they're not quite as successful or brash as the right wings right now, but we do have people like Sean King, for instance, out there collecting money from liberals, probably with their hearts in the right place, who want to solve racism or whatever. So they give Sean King money, and then, he just fucks off. I think I followed Sean King on Twitter for a few weeks before realizing that he was probably a con artist. And I remember thinking, why do people keep supporting this obvious scammer? Who falls for this? Well, in answer to the question, who falls for such an obvious scammer, I'd like to make a confession. Me. I fell for an obvious scammer. And I even made a video in which I asked you to fall for this obvious scammer as well. And so this video is my official mea culpa. I was the credulous dum-dum. So last December, I made a video about Rebecca Jones, a data scientist, I thought, who was in charge of updating Florida's COVID dashboard. And I was shocked to see footage of armed agents charging into Jones's home to secure her computers under the accusation that she had used her government login to access data after she was fired. Jones claimed that she was fired for refusing to rearrange the data to make it look like Florida was doing better than they actually were when it came to COVID infections, hospitalizations, and deaths. This was after Governor Ron DeSantis reopened the state against the advice of pretty much all doctors and immunologists. Jones set up a GoFundMe that I linked to, and that GoFundMe made more than $312,000 of a $350,000 goal. And apparently she also had several other successful crowdfunding endeavors. In May of this year, Charles C.W. Cook published an article claiming that Jones was, in fact, a grade A grifter. I saw that post, but I ignored it because it was published in the National Review, which is a conservative magazine that has previously published racist tirades from the likes of Ann Coulter and Dinesh D'Souza. Plus, they have a long history of denying the science of climate change. One particular highlight being when they tweeted this hilariously bad chart to show there's been no global temperature increase. Maybe you can spot what's wrong with this chart. In a debate, this would be known as poisoning the well. More on that in a future video. Or just sticking to my echo chamber. But in day-to-day reality, it's just valuing my own precious time and not wasting it reading something that has a good chance of being garbage. But last week, a Twitter account that I follow and enjoy, Bad COVID-19 Takes, published screenshots showing Jones first answering a pointed question from biostatistician Natalie E. Dean. Jones said that false negative antibody tests were a concern. Dean asked why, and Jones replied, because then you're not aware that you have and can spread the virus, which is wrong. A false negative PCR test would be concerning for that reason, but an antibody test doesn't look for an active infection. It looks for a past infection. And so a false negative would simply not inform the person that they had previously had and recovered from an infection days, weeks, or months ago. A false positive antibody test is much more dangerous because in that case, the subject might assume that They've already been infected, so they're now immune and they can go take bigger risks. But that single question on Twitter apparently caused Jones to immediately turn around and accuse Dean of harassing her, tagging Dean's employer in that accusation. And I stopped in my tracks when I saw that exchange because I immediately recognized that this was Rebecca Jones from the Florida To-Do. And here she was not only misunderstanding a really basic medical concept, but also completely overreacting to an actual scientist who knows more than her. That was enough to finally convince me to go back and read that National Review article. And wow. Wow. Like, it's a pretty good article, and they've got the receipts. So first, here's what is true as far as I can determine. Jones was not a data scientist. She was a website developer. She was never asked to actually delete or change any data, only to change the way that data was displayed, possibly to be misleading and make Florida look better than they were. That's a possibility. Jones was not fired for refusing to comply with data manipulation, but because she went bonkers releasing private data to the media without talking to anybody else in her department. Also, I previously repeated what she said, that Florida's COVID dashboard crashed due to the government's actions. That did not happen. Apparently, it crashed because Jones moved a ton of data to a separate file without informing IT. She then made herself the sole administrator of the database and then emailed everyone in the department, implying that she had been fired for refusing to manipulate data. And armed police officers did enter her home while her children were present, but only after she refused 30 minutes of attempts to get her to come outside peacefully so the cops could collect the computers that she had that contained the private personnel data of 19,000 employees, for which she has since been arrested and is now awaiting trial. I still don't think cops need to go anywhere near someone like this with guns, but yeah, she definitely had the means to protect her kids from even seeing the cops. And body cam footage shows that, contrary to what Jones claims, no one, in fact, pointed a gun in her or her kids' faces. Oh, also, this isn't even her first brush with the law. She previously was charged with criminal mischief in 2017, battery of a police officer in 2018, and misdemeanor stalking in 2019, related to an affair she had with a student at Florida State University while she was teaching there. According to her now ex-boyfriend, the two had sex in a classroom in 2017 when Jones was his married professor at FSU, and she was fired from the university after threatening to give a failing grade to his roommate as revenge. According to Jones, the two had a 6-month affair until October 2017, and the man is the father of her daughter, born in July 2018. After all of this, at the end of the day, Florida didn't suddenly see a bunch of unexplained deaths crop up from 2020. They're just hanging out there in the middle of the pack of states that fucked up their response to a pandemic in one way or another. A little worse than Delaware, a little better than Texas. So, yeah. This is my apology video. I fell for a really obvious trash fire of a person because she was telling a story that I believed. And let's be honest, that I wanted to believe even. You know, a Republican governor goes against the advice of scientists, and then he tries to cover up his big fucking mistake and goes after this heroic scientist. Well, you know, that didn't happen. Well, you know, the first bit happened. A governor did go against the recommendations of scientists. Many governors did. Our president did. And there have been repeated efforts on the part of many politicians to make things look rosier than they actually are. It's just not as obviously evil as Jones made it sound. It's more like this, you know, when cases started decreasing in the last few months, some states, including Florida, switched from daily to weekly updates for the general public. But in the past month, cases have been skyrocketing once again, but the weekly updates are still quietly coming out on Friday afternoons. climbing from 23,000 to 45,000 to 73,000, cases, leading people who are used to relying on daily updates, believing that things aren't as bad as they really are, which might lead to more reckless behavior. But states point out that the weekly figures smooth out daily bumps and show a clearer trend. Plus, they use up fewer resources. So, evil? No, just a different way to do things that might be good or might be bad, depending on how you look at it. Please keep all this in mind the next time you see a viral story centered around one charismatic person, even if I'm the one telling you about it, because we can all fall for the occasional grifter, I guess. Even me.